You're listening to The Bounding Box, where we talk about web development, geo development, and everything in between. All right, welcome to The Bounding Box. Today I got a great guest here. I got Andy Gupp. Andy, please tell us who you are, what you do, what's your problem?
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. I am a product engineer on the JavaScript SDK team, and I do a lot of different things, but I spend most of my time working on build related things for the SDK, like local builds and performance and working with frameworks. No problem today. It's Friday, so I'm good.
I
Good to
hear
go.
you, man. Great day, great day. Now, Andy is one of those folks at Esri that I've known for a long time. Like before I joined Esri, there's like a whole bunch of people I knew at Esri before I joined, just because of the community and dev summits and all this stuff here. So, and what were you doing early on when I first met you? Andy, probably like, I don't know, 2010 or so, around there, 2012 maybe.
Let's see, 2010, 2012. That might have been around the time of the first version of the JavaScript API. I'd have to really think about when that started, but that was where the current version of the JavaScript API got its start.
Yeah.
And and we were working on transitioning from the old ArcIMS days. Uh, there that was the mainstay back then, and we were starting to transition to actual web mapping, if you can call it that. And we were putting together, yeah, like I said, I have to go look it up to make sure, but we're putting together basically the foundation of what you see today. We have come so far from just displaying a map in a web browser and having basic functionality and displaying overlays and basic stuff like that in graphics. That was
Oh, wow.
powerful stuff back then.
That's nuts, man. Yeah, it's been a long journey, man. Long journey.
It sure has.
So, how did you first get started with GIS? And I always ask people this because it's always fascinating, right? People have so many different ways to get into maps and GIS and stuff. So how did you get there?
It's a weird starting point. I was working on satellite telemetry data, and satellite telemetry data is kind of related to GIS, and that was really my in. But it was a strange place that I started. It was working on kernel level device drivers and processing this huge amount of data that was streaming from these satellites that were taking pictures of the Earth.
Oh,
And that was how I got
geez.
my toe in the door for getting started with this stuff.
Jeez,
Yeah,
man, that's nuts. Where was that at?
that was here in Denver. I worked at a company called Raytheon. Some of the
Oh,
listeners
okay.
may be familiar with them.
Yeah.
And it was in the satellite systems division of Raytheon, which is where I worked. And what I worked on was the part of the system where we gathered all the data coming from the streaming satellites and stored it on tape drives. And it was these big, massive robotic tape drive systems that stored all that data.
Yeah,
Storage tech
you were getting
was
nerdy, Andy.
very nerdy. Yeah, well, there was a cool little anecdote is one of the robots that we worked on actually, I think I'm saying this correctly. It was the robot that drives a Phalanx Vulcan gun, which is a type of gun on U.S. destroyers. So the robotics that were involved in this stuff and the amount of data that we were handling was just incredible. So I'm humble when we talk about megabytes today, but that was terabytes and terabytes of data that's just coming down.
That is nuts. And I learned one thing I learned about you, Andy. Actually learned it from a previous podcast with the two Andrews I did, who both came out of MapQuest. Also informed me that you were at MapQuest too around the same time.
Yes, oh yes, I was. And I know which two people you're talking about. Yes, I was at MapQuest, let's see, 1998, 99, 2000. was the time frame. And there's some funny stories about MapQuest. That's where we all got our start with web mapping. And remember the little corner navigation clicks. What we did is we had a bunch of static map images. There wasn't such thing as Slippy maps at that
Oh yeah,
time.
no way.
Slippy maps didn't come around until I think 2004, if I got my timeline right. So this was pre Slippy maps, where you could throw the map and it would slowly come to a stop. We had the little navigation buttons on the corners. That was some fun times. Those were the startup days of the internet.com boom.
Yeah, it was. Really was the .com boom era there. That was around the time I think I was working at Earthlink too, which was all internet stuff and everything. So it was fun times, man. It was always a blast at those companies here.
That was fun times. We did some crazy stuff and really broke the ground for the maps that we see today. It's having that perspective of seeing where we were in the year 1998 when MapQuest really broke the mold for putting maps in web browsers, and how primitive the web browsers were back then.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't even think there were browsers on the phone at that point. I mean, I'm trying to think back then. I mean, we had these old analog phones, like it was really like the Qualcomms back then, and the maybe Motorola. There might have been Motorola,
Yeah,
Razor or
maybe.
something. But
There
even
were
then,
certainly Blackberries.
yeah, the Blackberries might be around then. I'm just trying to think if there was like a real browser on the phones you could use, but I'm pretty sure even like stuff like MapQuest, you would still have to sit down at a computer, go, okay, I'm gonna go from here to here. Awesome, I got my map. I'm gonna print that out now, and I got my directions. I'm good to go, right? Like that was very cool. That was neat.
It was very cool, and to do that at scale was what was really incredible. And I worked on the enterprise side, which was selling the core API to other big companies.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the exact number of maps that we were serving now, but per second. Uh, Don't quote me on this. It was like 100 maps per second or something, which was totally groundbreaking
Oh
back
yeah.
then.
Exactly. I mean,
Totally groundbreaking.
because like I said, people had to actually be at a computer at that time to actually do it. So that just gives you an idea how many people were using it just from their desk, right? Like to get that
Oh,
information.
absolutely. It was pretty novel to be able to search an address and get driving directions and and you'll probably fall off your seat, when you printed those maps back then. That was revolutionary. It's like, oh my goodness, now I can take these printouts with me when I go to this appointment. And
And I'm pretty sure there's
yeah,
always some sort of like a little Yahoo ad or something under the map too when you printed it, right? Like a little banner bar or some sort.
yeah, right. The ads that were included, that's how everything got paid for back then.
That was fine, man. No one cared back then, right? I mean,
No one cared. It was just so revolution. It wasn't even evolutionary. It was revolutionary that you could see the map. It wasn't just a static image. Like I said, you could pan and zoom in and print it. So some of our colleagues would be very happy about that.
that's awesome. Yeah, and then a few years later we get Google. I can't remember what year Google Maps was. That like 2006 or so, something,
2000,
or earlier than
I
that. 2002.
it was earlier than that. 2004 is when I remember Slippy Maps.
Okay.
Maybe 2004, 2005 time frame. I'm
Yeah,
not cheating. I'm not searching on the internet. I'm
yeah. But I know it was
trying to do
around
it
that.
for.
I know it was early 2000s around there or something when Google Maps came out, and that was kind of a big deal too. And there were some other mapping products back then too. I can't remember what, like consumer level, like things you would actually look for. But I always remember MapQuest was like the one, like the big boy, right?
Yes, it was. Vicinity was another one.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, Vicinity got bought by Microsoft, and I was trying to think who else did. I think Adobe did location services. They had a location-based services
They might have
division,
to.
and
Man.
it's changed since then.
Hey, but a lot of your stuff today, Andy, your day-to-day stuff, like you were talking about working on the builds and keeping everything performing and stuff like that. But you're also still pretty involved with community itself, right? Like the whole spatial community and the mapping users and JavaScript API users. Oh, I'm sorry, the Maps SDK for JavaScript users. Gotta get those
Right.
product names right, man.
Get it straight.
But what are some of the biggest hurdles and stuff you see that new users coming in to use the SDKs?
The biggest hurdles, yeah, jumping into it today is uh, really trying to get their head around what it is that they want to accomplish, because there's it's like a candy store. When you jump into the SDK today, there's so many choices compared to what we were just talking about when you just instantiate a map, and all this other stuff comes with it. And it was a big deal in let's see, around 2005, 2006, just to put something simple on the map. And it was all about finding doctors' offices and going to particular places. But if you flash forward to today and the capabilities that we have within the SDK and what JavaScript lets us do and what WebGL lets us do and what the fact that we have GPUs on all our machines, is I really see customers scratching their head on, wow, where do I start? I can do these cool visualization things. I can add all this stuff, but how do I wrap my head around this? And getting a focus on just a few things, just getting your toe stuck in the water, like adding a feature layer which will let you not just display points but do cool rendering stuff with this. You can change colors, you can add attributes, you can analyze attributes and do things on top of the data that you have through Arcade. Is just trying to focus and start small is the advice that I'm giving these new developers. Is test your toe in the water, try out our samples, go through the tutorials, and kind of get your head around what all's there from 100,000-foot level, and then start branching out where the stuff that interests you and you find cool.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like you were saying, like from the early days of like, okay, I got directions on the map and I got my points on the map, something like that. But then with the Maps SDK, you were able to start putting other things in there. They go, oh, these areas here are no, maybe floodplains, right? Or flood areas that are going to flood quite
Right.
often, type of thing. You see that on the map, and then people start doing these cool visualizations there. Dot density, right? That was a cool one, right?
Dot density.
You're able to start moving from just maps that are tools to maps that are now be able to tell stories with them, right? Be able to convey information,
Exactly.
which is really powerful.
Exactly. And it also, to dovetail on what you just said, it wasn't just static analysis anymore. And you may remember, like, JavaScript API version, I think it was version 1 or version 2, where you could drag a circle and it would dynamically query
That's
the
right.
map and it do the dynamic drive time polygons. That was so cool to see, and that really broke the ground for what we see today. Is it's not just a fixed image on a map, as you can use sliders and change legends and do all these things dynamically that just blow your mind away in terms of the capabilities for analysis.
I mean, just like the 3D stuff, right? You bring in like 3D and
Oh,
you're doing line of sight analysis and everything. That's nuts.
the line of sight analysis is so cool to be able to place yourself on a building on a map and see and tell what you can actually see on that map before you ever get to that location.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's real time crazy. And also to be able to dynamically know on the map where a particular elevation is, because that's also part of the line of sight, is to have like that line on there that says this is the elevation at the top of that building, and to be able to look at that stuff as it's changing is crazy. It blows my mind.
Yeah, that's all stuff that if you were doing that on desktop, what even 10 years ago was like a couple days worth of work, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
you do
insane.
it once. I'm looking at line of sight. I'm standing on this top of the building and I'm looking at north, and I want to create a view shed of what I can see from that position. And now you can use a little slider bar and change the shadows and use a calendar widget to change where everything looks on a particular day and year and season and add rain to it. It boggles my mind.
Now, with people building more apps and stuff like that, we get a lot of questions about frameworks. All right. So,
Yep.
what are some of the more popular framework questions you think come across your desk?
I'm glad you asked that. The most popular question that I get is, what framework should I use? And it also ties into the question of, do I even need a framework? There's some people who have just single page applications, and maybe they're a one person GIS shop, working in a county GIS office, just trying to meet the requirements that are coming down the pipeline for them. But which framework should I choose? And that is the most popular question I get. I always tell people, look, you will do yourself so many favors by just going out there and trying out the major ones, and those are React, Angular, Vue/Vite, Vue built on top of Vite. Of course, React is built on top of Vite. You can get an extension for that as well, and try them out. See what works for your requirement. You know your requirements best. You know your skill sets the best, and we've seen this happen over the years where a team or a developer may go with what's popular, but they can. It doesn't happen all the time, but they can end up building themselves into a corner where that particular framework didn't meet their needs, and that's a tough spot to get out of if that does happen. It's well worth your time to take a week or two or longer if your bosses will give you more time. Just play with it, try it out, do the tutorials, read the docs.
Yeah, exactly, and then learn it, because there's a lot of ways people use
Learn
the
it.
frameworks and they build their apps. Like you said, they build it. It might work for their initial vision that they have to do, but they've built themselves into a corner because once they try to scale it, the way they've built their app, it can't scale anymore, right? Like you're
Exactly.
trying to load 1,000 elements in a single page along with the map, right? Type of thing. So
Yes.
that's not going to grow. It's going to bog everything down. You got to start adding virtualization in there and all these different little pieces and stuff. So yeah, it's just
Really twisting and turning it. Well, it always leads to a second question is, well, how will I know if it's the right framework for me?
Yeah,
And I always tell people, trust your gut. You're the best judge of what's best
exactly.
for you. Trust your gut. Test drive this stuff. If you test drive it and it feels like the right front wheel is wobbling or the engine isn't powerful enough, it's like test driving a car. It's not the right thing for you.
Yeah, you're not going to know until you try them, so you get a feel for how they work and how they're going to, again, how they're going to scale out for you, how comfortable you are with it, how comfortable your other team members are going to be with it. 'Cause you might be solo for now, but then you got to consider
Yes.
like, oh, I'm gonna have like a couple people come on this project later on. I need to onboard them. I mean, how easy is it for someone new to pick up on whatever you pick, right? So you always have to think of that.
Exactly. You do. That's great points. And you'll know within a week or two, because if you're building a test app and throwing functionality in there, you're going to see how good the tutorials are, how good is the docs, how responsive is the community. I mean, those are the big three. And if you're not finding answers, or you're not seeing much motion in the issue threads for some
Yeah.
of these frameworks, and you're like, oh, that is foretelling what your life's going to be like 6 months from now when you run into these problems that we just talked about.
Yeah, and I guess I should honestly say most of the time I am going to tell people, no, just go with React, because there's so many resources and everything for it out there. Just React's a safe bet. Vue as well. I think Vue is always a safe bet. It's probably my preferred over React, but personal preferences aside, either one is a good shot. And then up until recently, I would have been like, don't worry, no Angular. I wasn't a fan of Angular. I admit that all the time. I admit it. But we do get a lot of people that use Angular because it's great for teams. because Angular really is the only one that's a full-fledged framework. If you go with React, you
Exactly.
need to pick a meta framework like like Remix or Next. Vue's got Nuxt that you can use,
Yep.
so you still need a meta framework on top of them to get all these full benefits. But Angular, you just get everything. So it's great for teams, and we have so many Angular users.
It is. In fact, I won't say most, but many of the largest sites that our customers use are built on Angular because, like you said, it's that Swiss Army knife. And Angular 18 just released yesterday. It has signals built in. They're still in developer preview. Uh, the old Zone.js, which was great when it came out because it meant that data binding was automatically enabled across all components. You basically had everything that you ever needed there. So uh, Angular changed out Webpack at Angular 18 is now secondary. ES Build is first. But like you said, yeah, you're taking on a lot when you build with Angular. You're getting everything in the toolbox and
Exactly.
then some right out of the box.
And with all the new updates and stuff, I think I might be changing my tune, right? I mean, even just a couple months ago, I think I even told you I tried some Angular stuff, and I was like, hey, that wasn't so bad. That was pretty straightforward to get something done.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say about Angular is that the team really has embraced change. For a long time, they didn't. And with the changes that I'm seeing at Angular 18 and what's coming down the pipeline, it's definitely worth a look if a user is listening to this podcast has, or a team, I should say, like you said, has a big project and there's going to be lots of people involved and they just need basically all the bells and whistles when you install it without having to add Nuxt and all these other things, and that might be something to look at.
Yeah, exactly. So
Good stuff coming.
it's a great choice. I can't argue with that anymore.
They're making good changes, and React, Vue, those React very popular, Vue very popular. It's just they're just words until you get in there and actually try them out and get that feel for how those frameworks work and within your requirements, bolt some of your functionality in there.
And now that React 19 is going to have full web component support, I mean, that's going to be huge. That's big
That's
for
huge.
us because of our components. It's big for everybody. And he's going to want, and I think
That's
that you're going to
a
see a
good
lot
point.
more people get interested in web components and custom elements because React now supports them. People were kind of brushing them off to now, and they have their pros and cons, yes, for sure. But I think we're going to see a lot more people get more interested in them going forward because now they know they can use them anywhere they want. Now it works seamlessly across the board because Angular already kind of, I mean, we have to use a wrapper still for certain things, but if you weren't doing like property binding, just doing attribute stuff, they still work in Angular without anything special. And I think you need them for the events too. Vue, they just work. Svelte,
Right.
they just work. And now in React, they're just going to work. So
That's a great point.
I think we're going to see a
Yeah,
big
great point.
explosion there.
I agree. React kind of stagnated there for a while at version 18, and everybody was kind of looking at it out of the corner of their eye, wondering what was going to happen. And this is really a game changer, and it helps cement this standard that's been around for a long time, 2012, 2011,
Yeah.
for the standard, and it's I think it's going to help cement it. A lot of people didn't know that they were using web components. Like with Angular, when
Oh,
you
yeah.
looked at the HTML element name, it's like, how did that happen when you learn Angular or React for the first time that you're using a custom element and you didn't know it, and now that it's standardized and standardizing across all these frameworks is going to make it seamless. The transportability story that we used to tell is really becoming a reality now.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. I think you see a lot more of that going forward.
Indeed, I'm looking forward to it.
So, what is one thing you think confuses users on a regular basis coming into the Maps SDK, even if it's a seasoned user?
Yeah, it's it's not so well. The first answer that I'll give you is more academic, and I think it's this way across any API library, is when to call tech support. I don't think it's so much has to do with functionality. I mean, we've all experienced that as,
Yeah, yeah.
when you have an option to call tech support. We're so used to working with open source, React, Angular, Vue, the build tools. A lot of this stuff is open source, and you're not paying any license fees. And I think that creates some confusion, not necessarily related to the functionality, but what triggers when I ask questions on the community or on GitHub or actually call tech support, and knowing where that dividing line is. I know that didn't directly answer
No,
your
but
question.
it's a valid point because and honestly, yeah, we a lot of the team, especially on the Maps Escape JavaScript, and I'm sure other teams as well, are very open to answering questions on the Esri community or on GitHub, especially if there's something that interests us and we think, oh, that's the quick fix type of deal or whatever. But if it is like a valid bug of some sort, your best bet really is call tech support. You'll get a ticket number. And I know people don't want to call because they have to provide a repo example, and they kind of think that their issue just kind of goes into some black hole that they never see again. But it's not true. Those tickets get validated. That's a main thing. Tech support will validate the bug. And if it's a valid bug and not just like a user error or
Exactly.
something, then it goes into the internal system, comes back to the developers on the team, and they can track it. And we'll update tech support gets updated when something gets fixed automatically through our system. They get notified, then it goes an email out to the customer, and everything's tracked nicely that way. Rather than just trying to remember,
Exactly.
oh, there was this community post. I asked this question. This guy gave me
Mm-hmm.
a code pen, and oh, where is it? Because I don't remember it anymore. Or they told me that they're going to look at it, right?
Yeah, and then you never heard back from it, and you forgot
Yeah,
too.
exactly. Like that's happened to me. Like I said, oh, you know, I sent it to someone that's going to look at it for you. But I mean, people on the team are working on dozens of things every day. So it's like, sometimes these things just kind of get lost in the shuffle somewhere. So, or someone goes on vacation. That's happened before. But
Very much so.
if you have the option to call tech support, just call tech support. Just do it. It's well worth it.
Yeah, and they'll tell you if it's something that you can't open a ticket for. And we have a mandate to, I'm gonna keep this short, but we have a mandate to look at every bug that gets pushed across the wire to the team,
Yeah.
and that's a mandate. But there's not a we do our best to track stuff that's out in the community. I know other API teams do that too. But sometimes you miss it or you're busy with something else. But that was the point I wanted to make on that. And then I had a second answer to your
Yes.
question related to functionality is, uh, if I just want to do a basic map, I don't want anything fancy. I've gotten feedback from users to say, look, I just want a street map. That's all I want, to get started. And it's there, it's built in, and it's the default is what I end up telling them. Tying into what we were just talking about all this amazing visualization stuff that we can do, these developers that are just getting started say, hey, look, I just have to focus. I just need a street map. And that is the default for all of our map SDK. Is you can change whatever base map you want. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, so you can get started out of the box. And it's the same for components. It's the same for the core API. Streets, topographic, whatever your choice. And strangely enough, that's the question that comes up the most, because in a lot of our examples we'll show these beautiful maps, which are incredible. And that's great if you've already gotten started and you kind of have a sense of what's in there, the renders, the layers, and all the different pieces. So that was the second item I was going to mention.
Yeah, sometimes someone just does want a point on the map. That's all they want. They
Sometimes.
just need to highlight one thing on the map, and that they're good to go. Right?
Exactly. That's all I need. I just need that to get started, or I had a requirement to do that for my boss, or whatever the case may be.
Nice, Andy. Well, I want to be respectful of your time here, Andy, but before I let you go, you got any tips,
Yes,
tricks, words of wisdom for our listeners? Anything at all, not even GIS related, whatever you got.
I do. It it comes up a lot is when there is a problem, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when there is a problem. How to get to the bottom of this? How do I solve this problem? And we do have Dev Summit sessions related to debugging, and we have some blog posts related to debugging. But for I wanted to specifically address for local builds. And when users are using local builds, if they have complex applications, there's potentially lots of stuff involved. Like there's the module bundler, there's the framework, there's Calcite, there's our SDK. Lots of stuff is going on. So what I've been telling people is go to our ESM samples that are out on JSAPI resources repo, JSAPI resources repo, and use those as a starting point to try and figure out what's going on in your main application. And what I let these users know is we validate against those applications and bundler samples every single day. They're tested for functionality, basic functionality and performance every day. They're kind of our golden test case if there's an issue. And I understand in big applications you can't always do that, but if you can, that is a great starting point to try and isolate an issue.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it could be something to do with your web map or your layer, maybe a config, something like that. That happens every now and then. Uh, a popular one I've seen quite a bit, and I just got it recently for somebody. Is they publish a layer with labels with the font that isn't supported in online, right? Tahoma.
Oops.
Tahoma. I don't know what it is about Tahoma.
Tahoma.
Tahoma is not in online, but apparently, like it might be the default in Windows or something. I'm not sure, but
Mm-hmm.
you publish that layer to online from your desktop machine in Pro or ArcMap, maybe I don't know what. But yeah, and then you start getting these weird network errors that I can't find that font. So yeah,
Oh,
like
right.
just use our those samples and resources, add your layer into it, and then let's see what happens. Just narrow it down.
Narrow down. It's a clean sample. We know what a clean sample in the sense that we know what the dependencies are, and there's nothing extra in there
Yeah,
to interfere with what you might be testing. Yeah, that's a great point. That's an excellent one too.
awesome.
You'll see that failed request.
Hey, great, Andy. I appreciate it, Andy. Thank you very much. You have yourself a good time.
Thanks, Renee. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you for listening to the Bounding Box today. Please subscribe for more content.